My name is Bob Perciasepe. I'm the president of the Center for Climate and Energy Solutions, and I'm being joined up here by Kathleen Merrigan, who is the executive director of sustainability at GW, and Lee Paddock, who's the associate dean for the GW Law School, and our host today. I'll leave it to you guys to welcome everybody to your wonderful campus.
Thanks, Bob.
I'll go first.
Sure. Hello, everybody. Welcome. It's really exciting to have you here on campus. And for those of us at GW involved in sustainability, to be collaborating with our colleagues at C2ES. Not the first time we've been collaborating. We worked together to bring about GreenGov on June 10th, where we had over 200 federal sustainability managers on campus talking about how we can green the federal government. A few basics about sustainability at GW. We have 38 degree and certificate programs related to sustainability. We have our most popular undergraduate minor is in sustainability, 405 courses across the university related to sustainability, 170 faculty members engaged in sustainability research, and 10 institutes and that are deeply involved in sustainability. So it is one of 9 core values of GW. It's something that our president lives and breathes as a small family farmer. And our provost believes that sustainability is really the opportunity area to really cross over the finish line, demonstrating the power of interdisciplinary research and education. So just a big overview of what's going on here. It's a very exciting place, and we're glad to have this conversation today.
So I'm Lee Paddock, Associate Dean for the Environment and Energy Program. And of course, climate and energy is one of the top initiatives for the sustainability program overall. We've been doing environment here for 45 years. This is our 45th anniversary of our environmental law program at GW. So a long time. You'll be hearing from one of our staff members this afternoon as moderator, Donna Atanasio, who leads our Sustainable Energy Initiative. So energy is also a big part of our work at GW. So we're very pleased to be collaborating with C2ES and very pleased to have you all here in our moot court room, and Bob promises not to be too judgmental today. But we hope you have a good day and a good program, and with that, I'll turn it to your host, Bob Perciasepe. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen and Lee. It really is a pleasure to be here on campus. So I'm going to try to set the stage a little bit here. I'll give you the really nickel tour of C2ES, which is, most of you probably know who we are, but the Center for Climate and Energy Solutions is a nonpartisan, nonprofit think tank that works on getting businesses engaged, bringing diverse views together to work on climate issues. It's a pretty important work that we do to try to bring folks together, and today I think is going to be another one of those examples where that happens. We have top financial experts from the Bank of America, JP Morgan Chase, and the Coalition for Green Capital. We have state leaders from Tennessee and Pennsylvania, and we have energy leaders from Schneider Electric and Duke Energy. And I think that in itself shows you the mix of people that have to start, and already are, but have to start really working harder and harder together to make sure that we can make progress on clean energy and energy efficiency. Now, I would guess that, and I have, this is no disrespect to my financial friends in the office, I certainly spent a lot of time studying it myself, but it probably was not one of everybody's favorite classes in college. You know,
it was not.
It was. I said everybody, not necessarily you guys. So, but it's got to be one of the most important things we deal with now, because if we want to be more efficient, if we want to have a lower carbon way to generate electricity and run transportation, we have engineering and technology moving forward, but we're also going to have to figure out one of the key questions, which is how do we pay for it? How do we make it happen? How do we accelerate that rate of change? And financing is one way, and using markets are one way to try to accelerate that rate of change. You know, on the other side of the coin, we're already paying the cost of climate impacts, increasing frequent storms and intense heat. We're reading about this around the country, around the world, with people in severe heat waves in different parts of the world. We're seeing rising sea level, which is creating higher risk at the coastal areas around the world. And so we're facing more prospects of increasing damage to buildings and to supply chains and our general fabric of food flow in the world from drought. And the primary cause of these problems, and you can take this all the way up to the Vatican, is us. I heard Gina McCarthy say the other day, if somebody asks her if climate change is real, she'll say, is the Pope Catholic? So it's a whole new thing. But the primary cause is us, and we've been putting some of these heat-trapping gases in the atmosphere for quite a while. And last year, for instance, was the hottest year recorded globally. It certainly was cold in Washington, D.C. and Boston, I know this. But on a global scale, it was the hottest year recorded in over 100 years of record-keeping on global temperatures. But the other side of the coin is we know that there are things we can do. We know what some of the solutions are. We know how to make progress within a generation to try to change that trajectory. And part of that, and a significant part of that, is going to be cleaner energy, cleaner cars, and more efficient ways to use energy. United States, in our country, the #1 source of these emissions are the generation of electricity. And EPA is in the process of finalizing a plan that will put a lot of responsibility on states to look at how they can innovate to develop clean power plans to reduce emissions from electric generation in the country. We already have a process underway with light-duty vehicles and heavy-duty trucks, making them more energy efficient, and we have a lot of opportunity now to think about how to do this at the state level for power. And the beauty here is that while we continue to think about how to deal with this at the national level, cities and states and businesses are already in the process of innovating. They're already in the process of trying to make progress. And I think we're going to hear about some of that today, as not only how to make progress on reducing the emissions, but also on progress on how to find ways to accelerate the rate of change and stimulate innovation. Because that is one of the key things we want to see happen over the next year and several years, is how we can continue to stimulate progress, how can we continue to stimulate innovation. And part of that has to be how we use the flexibility that states are going to have to look at how to reduce emissions from and develop a clean power profile in each state. You know, clean power is a really important part of what we need to do, but it also needs to be affordable. This is a balance that we need to have. It needs to be reliable. So these are all factors that have to come together here, and all of them are going to require how we look at the financial aspects of it. The objective of having cleaner power and also using less of it provides a real opportunity to find that sweet spot of maintaining that affordability profile. It's sort of what we're looking at with automobiles, where even if the price of an individual car, as they go up every year, but if you use less fuel, the actual cost of the car and to own the car is cheaper. And the same can be said with energy efficiency in the home, in the business, in the industry. Obviously, if we use less electricity, we pay for less of it, and then we can balance out on how we finance some of those improvements. So when our group, C2ES, looked at some of the modeling that's been done over the last year or two on the Clean Power Plan that EPA has proposed and similar approaches to dealing with clean power at the state and local level. We find that energy efficiency is in just about every model we looked at is one of the key low-cost approaches to making progress. And it also is one of the reasons that some of those models they have a span of what they project the cost of doing this will be, but some of the models show the cost to actually be cost savings over the next 10 to 15 years, while some show impacts that are higher than cost savings, but in the range of 25 cents a day. So energy efficiency makes that possible, and it's a pretty important thing. So today, we're going to explore how to catalyze the investment. What are people doing? How do we leverage public dollars with private dollars? How do we get innovative business models involved? What's already working? And then also, how do we overcome some of the barriers? We have barriers like high upfront costs to do some of these things. Well, how does that balance out with the long-term savings? Another barrier might be some of the lack of familiarity with different financing mechanisms, whether it's a municipal government not having that familiarity, all the way to a business not having that familiarity. So we've done some summaries of some of the work that's going on around the country, and that is out on the table outside. But there are two ideas I'll just mention very briefly here, which we'll talk about a little bit more in the panels. One is clean energy banks. Sometimes these are called green banks. They're generally government-created institutions that provide an opportunity to use public and private funds, to leverage private funds. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today, but it's an approach where a small amount of public dollars can help leverage a lot. Connecticut, which is already doing this, New York, Kentucky, Hawaii, Maryland and California are thinking about them. I know the District of Columbia is thinking about creating one. So they're something that is moving forward. It's not just providing loans necessarily, it could also provide guarantees, other ways to bring interest rates down, a whole host of opportunities once you move into that direction. And in Connecticut, where they've been doing it for a while, they have almost $100 million of assets and loans out there and projects underway, and they're leveraging about I think it's $9 of private investment for every public dollar that's put into that effort. Another frame is an energy services company, or an ESCO, people call them. This is where private funds can come in and do the upfront cost, which was a barrier I mentioned earlier, and then the sharing of the savings over time of those efficiency projects between the investor that put in the capital and the operator of the building or the facility. So, innovative financing tools are not going to be a panacea here. We can't just say, well, we can figure this out. We got 5 of these, one from column A and one from column B, and we're done. But they are an essential tool. As we develop technology, we have to be able to get it implemented. And the more we implement it, the cost comes down. We see this happening with solar voltaic cells, with batteries. The more we can implement these projects and these technologies, the lower the unit cost becomes. So this engaging a broader and a diverse group of folks on how we can be thinking about this in the process that states are about to go through is a pretty important part of what we want to do today as well. And to help me make sense, not that it's been a long time since I worked for a state, but I live in one when I'm in New York. I want to introduce Bob Martineau, who is in the back of the room. Bob, why don't you come on down? To help me put this conversation in the context of states who are going to be working, I want to say starting, ING. Have a seat here, I'll join you in a second. But I think the states have already started in most cases. They're already working on this, and this is the plans that we'll be needing for the Clean Power Plan to look at reducing the emissions from the generation of electricity. Bob is the commissioner for the Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation. And unlike most of his colleagues around the country, he actually has the energy and the environment portfolio under the same state commissioner. There's a few other states that have that. Connecticut, I just mentioned, is another one. But it puts him in a very unique position to being able to look at how these things, what are the programs they have going on in Tennessee, how they could be enhanced, how they're going to work in tandem to help implement a plan, or how do they work in a plan. Another thing that I want to mention about Bob is that, in fact, apparently this is going to be a conversation between the Bobs, is that he's also the current president of the Environmental Council of the States. And I want to do a slight shout out to the Environmental Council of the States here, because it is a council of all the state environmental commissioners around the cabinet level environmental commissioners from every state. And it has been a critical group getting state input into the Clean Power Plan work that EPA is doing. There's been numerous meetings, which I'm no longer allowed to go to, between the states and EPA. But I heard rumors that they're being very effective in their ability to make sure that the kind of flexibility that we're going to need is maintained as EPA goes into their final rule. So with Bob up at the table here, I'm going to join him, and we'll have a little conversation about getting started with the innovations and financing and state plans. Bob, thank you.
Thank you.
So how was that metro ride this morning?
I had 3,000 other 4-H'ers trying to get on the subway at the same time. We're all in
So is it
it's an adventure.
it's 4-H time, and
I guess it's 4-H comes to Washington. But anyway, well, thanks, Bob, and thanks for the opportunity to be here. Is this on? You guys hear this at all?
yeah, I think
No? No, it says it's on. It's running. Okay. Thanks for the opportunity to be here, Bob. And Bob, I appreciate the acknowledgement of ECOS, and Bob, in his role of Deputy Administrator, was really instrumental in sort of reinvigorating that working relationship between the states and EPA, and having conversations. And as you all know, states are all over the map politically, and some agree with EPA sometimes, and some agree with EPA others. But whatever the topic, trying to work through constructive dialogue, and in the end, basically many of the goals are the same. It's sometimes the mechanisms or the timetables to get there that there's disagreement. But pleased to be here and talk about some of the things we're doing, and I can kick off and just talk about a few of the financing kind of things, or if you've got specific questions.
well, obviously the first question, since you're here and you're from Tennessee and you've got both the energy and the environment portfolio for the governor, how are you starting to see those things work together?
Well, we've been working on a number of things, and we're unique also because we don't have typically investor-owned utilities, because our entire service area, except for a few thousand people, is the Tennessee Valley Authority, the quasi-governmental. So there's sort of a monopoly on the direct distribution of power, so it changes some things. We don't have a PSC, so to speak, that are looking at reliability and things. That's TVA themselves. But as a state, we've been looking over the last couple of years, and really the last decade, at ways to stimulate energy conservation and energy efficiency. As you said, sometimes the lowest cost energy conservation measures are some of the lowest cost alternatives, and particularly for power generators now, looking at conservation measures. And they don't have any kilowatt or any megawatt not generated. You don't have to debate about the source of where it's generated and how clean it is and what are the byproducts of it, whether it's nuclear or coal-fired, if you're not generating it, and either being a hedge against demand growth or, in fact, leading to consumption reduction. So we've done a couple things. This year, the governor, in a legislative initiative, funded about $42 million, and anticipation is over the next 4 years we'll do $40 to $50 million. Starting with the sort of concept of lead by example, we looked at our state building facilities, including the universities and community colleges, as well as sort of the typical state office buildings and prisons and children's homes and all the things we run, and we spend upwards of $200 million a year in energy. And And really, nobody had ever really looked at how to do that more efficiently and effective, at least not in any systematic way. We didn't even know, because they're just all purchase orders that each individual department sends in to get paid through the budget response. So we looked and said, hey, I think there's a way we can make some kind of low-hanging fruit cost savings. So the governor invested a plan, and we've estimated that we can reduce energy costs by 15 to 20% over the next 8 years with some smart energy conservation measures. About $5 million of that 40 million is to stimulate some renewable behind-the-meter kind of things, that decentralized. And so we think within a few years we can save upwards of $40 million. We're also looking in that, potentially the opportunity using ESCOs as part of that partnership. When Governor Haslam was mayor of Knoxville, he started an initiative in the city there, and they use some ESCOs. Some individual agencies have done that. We also have, in a public-private partnership with a group called Pathway Lending, a $33 million revolving loan fund that we started back in 2010 for private sector folks. It's practically free money. It's 2% interest, revolving loan fund. And it's to assist commercial and industrial facilities in looking at energy efficiency projects. And we thought that would be kind of just sucked up really quickly. And one of the challenges, and look forward to talking about today, is we still have about a third of that money that's not in circulation. And sort of what are the impediments? Why are people not sort of coming to do that? And I think that's the challenge of competing for capital internally. Somebody wants to do the product line. Somebody wants to do some R&D. Where do you make those investments, and how does that energy manager get into the queue to make those investments? Because even though the fund is there, it's still debt that the company has to take on and pay back. One of the things we're looking to do to help utilize that money better is to expand that to local governments and quasi-governmental entities, school systems and things like that they could use that revolving fund loan. The other thing we do is we serve, because we have the energy piece, the Department of Energy's qualified energy conservation bonds, and we have about $65 million or so that we do energy conservation bonds to the local governments and the state that can use that to finance energy conservation. And so we've had several cities and counties use that as a mechanism, and very successfully. One of the larger metropolitan areas paid that back substantially early, because when they use that investment. And they're helping support the green communities programs and things like that. We have an energy efficiency school initiative. We have a state lottery, and some of that money goes into education, but a couple of years ago the legislature took about $90 million of that lottery reserve and said the schools could use that to promote energy conservation in the schools, and about 95% of our state school districts have used some of that money in some way for energy efficiency. And there's about 89 million of the 90 million has been obligated in one way or the other. So that's been pretty successful. One of the things we're trying to get better at is, because people always say, well, show me the savings. And if your energy costs are going up 2 or 3% a year, but you're making 3 to 5% energy savings, you may not look like you have a real delta. So one of the things we're doing with this newest initiative is putting in software so we can really track the actual energy usage and track the bills. And if you change the utilization of a building or something and double the number of people in it, or go year-round school, how are you gonna sort of true up those costs? So that's our challenge, to prove that in fact those cost savings are coming back, to show that upfront investment or a community taking on debt, it's worth that investment. So that's one of the real focuses, is how do we measure what the true savings are. If energy costs went up, you'd say, well, this is a cost avoided, it's not a true raw dollar savings. Or we've done some like the federal government and others, densification of our state-owned buildings to put more open space and smaller offices and stuff. So the building I'm in, we went from having 800 or 900 people in there to 1,800 people in there. Well, that's a lot more computers and a lot more people moving around. So while we did a lot of energy efficiency things there, we're actually still getting a cost saving. The energy cost, even though we doubled the number of people in the building, has gone down.
So you mentioned that the idea of the megawatt not used is the lowest cost way to reduce the emissions, and you I think, hit two key factors that have to be dealt with. One is the utilization of the resources available. How do you accelerate that? And how do you measure it? Those are pretty important components that have to be worked into the state process.
And I think it's clearly the cleanest energy, the milliwatt used. It's the next case is to take that upfront cost and you say, how do you capture the repayment cost? So yeah, it's all of those things, and that's what we're trying to build in any of these energy kind of grants or loan programs now is building in the requirement to do some kind of capture of the savings and the utilization, so that you can either show the cost avoided or the true savings as you implement these measures. And you also want to know, if you're doing some pilot projects, what works and what doesn't. So we're trying to encourage. You can do a lot of lighting projects and you're going to get a certain payback, but if you're trying to do some different things and upgrade new technologies in HVAC systems or other things that more creative things, you want to know what works, and some things may not work, so you can say, okay, that didn't get the bang for the buck we thought it was. Vendor guarantee didn't play out, or they exceeded it. But most of the cases we're finding the vendors and stuff are being pretty conservative, and we're actually getting cost savings greater than we anticipated.
Yeah, you mentioned the governor's history as the mayor of Knoxville, and you're right, Knoxville has a very substantial approach to ESCOs on the street lighting and the city buildings and the sport activities. Obviously, ESCOs is one way to get private capital engaged. Have you been thinking more broadly about what the role for business engagement and private sector roles are? And I know you have the quasi-governmental TVA, but how do you see that?
I think there's lots of opportunities. Pathway Lending is one of the other program initiatives where they put together a sort of bank financing program. We put some state dollars in and some private bank dollars in to fund that program and see that as an investment. And then, I think a lot with the business sector, obviously the larger companies, the Fortune 500 folks are looking at this, and they have the Bill Tyndalls and the technology, the environmental managers and people who are, this guy over there, are looking at this every day, and it's the smaller communities and it's the smaller and mid-sized businesses that may not have the expertise. So the first thing is, what kind of technical assistance and knowledge transfer can you do, either the government or larger companies, being a model, sharing best practices. So we're doing a lot of outreach and energy efficient school, initiative where we bring people together to share best practices and provide technical resources, and then getting that down. But we're obviously, and folks in the renewable energy sector and investments there, we have Oak Ridge National Lab, which is a public-private entities going on there doing cutting-edge projects. So bringing in the private sector and both manufacturing or other industrial and the financial world would be key, I think, to taking that to the next level, that people get comfortable with that. And then obviously the ESCOs, the Johnson Controls and others that are in that business. One of the challenges for, frankly, government entities is to wrap their head around ESCOs. The government procurement people are so used to paying for a service and paying by the hour, and businesses know how to share, fee savings, and the concept of not paying for something, the whole RFP process, and you have to bid and what's the lowest cost. The whole concept of saying, well, you'll get paid out of your savings is something that governmental entities have a hard time. Well, and then the natural reaction is, well, if they're going to come in and save us 10% of our energy costs, why don't we just do it ourselves? Well, you got to get the financing, and so they can be a mechanism to the financing. So getting folks comfortable with that relationship, and I think early on there were some ESCOs that weren't that good and weren't really sophisticated about doing that. But as people get refined on that, I think you'll see a broader public-private partnership, because obviously, if those ESCOs are doing it, they're either financing it themselves or they're working with private, commercial lenders and stuff to finance those investments.
Well, thanks, Bob. I think that helped frame a little bit on how states are beginning to think about it, and I think it's inherent. It's all built into what you were talking about, how you guys are looking at this as a component of your energy program going forward. I want to keep us a little bit on track here. We're just a tad behind, but I do want to give an opportunity for one question quick for Bob from the audience before we bring the rest of the panel up, if there are any questions for Bob. Otherwise, you can get them again at the end of the panel.